In a world that is filled with crime and murder and people doing unexplainable and awful things to one another, one of the worst things that we can find to read and write about is the killing of children by other children. As we're going to see in this case today, our children are growing up in a world that is sick, and our children are growing up in a world that seemingly breathes hatred around each and every corner. This week we are going to talk about a young transgender girl who was lured out of her home by someone that she considered one of her very few friends, and another teen with their sole goal being to murder her. This story has so many sides to it that are sad and distressing. We have teens, children really, who are riddled with anxiety, dealing with autism spectrum disorder, and being influenced by one another, the world around them, and so much hatred. This is a case that covers the horrifying and far too soon end to one life at the hands of two people who were and are clearly dealing with a plethora of their own issues, and not the least of which were sadism and hatred. Hello, my name is Lance, and welcome to episode 127 of Gone But Never Forgotten, Transphobia and Hatred, the Murder of Brianna Ghey. This week's case really encompasses a lot of things that I feel that the general public at large are not unaware of, but perhaps better put, they are uneducated and undereducated on. Myself included, really, and until recently in my life, so that is certainly not meant as a slight on anyone. As such, I'm going to take a few moments to give a supremely basic understanding of two of the topics and terms that do come up within this case. I highly recommend that each and every person that is listening to this case take the time to further explore, educate, and understand these topics, as well as any topics that you don't understand, because I firmly believe that understanding is something that is severely lacking in the world around us, and that if we would just take some time to understand one another, that would overcome a major obstacle that leads to things like murder, assault, abuse, and so much more every single day and in every country around the world. The first thing I want to touch on is autism spectrum disorder. I start here because at varying points in this case, it was something that both suspects and the victim were described as having. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. People with ASD often have difficulties with communication and interaction with other people, restricted interests, and repetitive behaviors and symptoms that affect their ability to function in school, work, and other areas of life. Autism is known as a spectrum disorder because there is a wide variation in type of severity of symptoms that people with ASD have and experience. As we're going to see in this week's case, people who have ASD are certainly a vulnerable sector because along with the disabilities that they face in terms of interactions with people, They can also be far more trusting and far more unlikely to assess the severity and dangerousness of situations that they come up against within their lives. The second term is transgender. Much like autism spectrum disorder, I am not going to do a service here in this explanation that will help open minds and help with understanding. I just want to give a base understanding of what the term means because in my experience, most people do not have an understanding of the word and as such of the people who are transgender. Transgender is a term that describes a person whose gender identity is different than the sex that they were assigned at birth, most likely based upon their physical makeup. The sex that one is assigned at birth is usually male or female, and as such, a person who identifies themselves as a gender that is different than the one that they were assigned is considered to be transgender. For example, in a very limited explanation, a transgender female, which Brianna Ghey was, is a woman or girl who was assigned the sex of male at their birth, but who identifies as a woman. Brianna Ghey was born on November 7th of 2006, and at the time of her murder, she was a 16-year-old student and transgender girl who was in grade 11 at Birchwood Community High School in the Birchwood area of Warrington, England. When Brianna was a teenager, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and she was also diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Brianna's mom, Esther, would say that those diagnoses impaired Brianna's ability to identify dangerous situations, and that those diagnoses caused and added to significant anxiety that Brianna dealt with on a daily basis. Due to her diagnoses, Brianna did not take part in regular classes and lessons within high school, and instead a lot of her teaching was done via one-on-one tutoring in her school's inclusion room. An inclusion classroom is an educational classroom where students who have learning differences learn alongside students who do not have learning differences in an attempt to integrate the students together. Inclusive classrooms are welcoming and meant to support the diverse academic, social, emotional, and communication needs of all students that are in these classrooms. Brianna faced years and years of harassment and bullying based on her diagnosis, especially for being on the autism spectrum, and of course, for being transgender. She faced that bullying online and in person at school and also in the community at large. It was even reported that Brianna was repeatedly gang beaten by people at her school because of transphobia. However, in a statement after her murder that was apparently approved by Esther, one of Brianna's teachers would say that Brianna was not bullied at school. Miss Emma Mills would put out a statement that said, quote, "I spoke again to Brianna's mom, who confirmed that Brianna was not bullied at Birchwood and always felt well supported by the school, and she gave me permission to share this with you all," unquote. Obviously, as we all know in any true crime case, rumors can spread and become a part of the online narrative, whether there are facts that back them up or not. However, I would be remiss if I didn't also say that teenagers do not always tell their parents when they are being bullied either. As such, I think that it may be safe to assume that the truth lies somewhere in between. In one of the last social media posts that Brianna made before her death, she did give it the title, "Got Excluded from School." One thing that is certain is that Brianna was bullied online. She actually had a pretty substantial following on TikTok because she decided that she wanted to be an advocate for other transgender people on that app, and at large within the world. It seemed that Brianna really was able to open up on TikTok and show a bit of her true self. She made friends with many young people around the world, and she even helped many young transgender girls to safely and legally access transgender hormone therapy. Brianna also was known for making videos on TikTok that helped other young women learn how to do their makeup, and she also made many videos of her dancing and lip syncing to pop music. Everyone that knew Brianna says that she was a young lady who was filled with love, filled with laughter, and who was always willing to listen to other people and their struggles. To the few people that Brianna was able to open up to, she was seen as an incredible young woman who would do frankly anything to help anyone. As the judge would later put it at trial, it really is a shame that Brianna and the world around her did not get to see her fulfill her full potential and live so much more life. One of the most heart-wrenching things about this case is the fact that one of the people who killed her was one of the people that Brianna had felt comfortable opening up to. Scarlett Jenkinson was a 15-year-old girl who previously attended Colchester High School in Warrington, but who was moved to Birchwood High School in the autumn of 2022 after Scarlett had been involved in an incident at Colchester High School. Scarlett had faced expulsion before she was moved to the new school after she had brought cannabis edibles to school. Not only, though, had she brought the edibles to school, she had fed the edibles to a younger student without that student having knowledge that they were, in fact, eating edibles. That change in schools is how Scarlett and Brianna would meet, as Scarlett was placed in the same inclusion class as Brianna, and it seems that the two became relatively fast friends. Scarlett was in the inclusion class for 3 hours a week. Over time, it seems like Scarlett became fascinated with Brianna, even telling people that she found Brianna incredibly beautiful and that she was glad to have a friend so quickly after switching schools. She would even tell people that she was, quote, obsessed with Brianna. Unbeknownst to most, if not everyone in her life, though, Scarlett had another obsession that seemed to be taking over her time and her mind, and that obsession was with serial killers. Scarlett spent much of her time watching documentaries on serial killers, and she also had extensive notes on notorious serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy. In a released photo of some of her notes, Scarlett had even highlighted how smart Jeffrey Dahmer was to have dismembered his victims. Scarlett had also downloaded a special web browser so that she could peruse the dark web and watch videos that she found there that showed murder and torture. Scarlett also had a hit list of names of people that she wanted to kill. Most of the names on that list were of people who she didn't like, but one of those names was Brianna Ghey. Those that know Scarlett described her as a bright girl. One teacher even explicitly said that she didn't have any red flags that would have served up as a warning of what was to come. Scarlett was said to have been a polite and quiet child, even up to when she started high school. Friends, however, including her co-conspirator Eddie Ratcliffe, would say that Scarlett was very, very smart, but that she was also a sociopath and that she seemed to lack any real emotion. Friends said that Scarlett was socially awkward and that she had very few close friends and, in fact, only 3 followers on Instagram. Eddie Ratcliffe was a student at Colchester High School at the time of the murder, the school that Scarlett had previously attended and been removed from. Eddie was described by many as incredibly smart and even as a role model to other students. Eddie was said to have top grades, and he was even self-teaching himself A-levels at the age of 15. A-levels are advanced level curriculum courses in England that are generally taken between the ages of 16 and 18. Eddie was also proficient at kickboxing. In 2018, he had competed at a kickboxing championship in Jamaica as an amateur kickboxer. Eddie was also diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and it was said by fellow students that he was very much a loner. Neighbors would say that, much like Scarlett, Eddie didn't seem to have any real red flags to give warning signs that he was capable of considering or committing murder. Eddie did have a fascination with knives and blades, but that was never seen truly as a warning sign. Unfortunately, he would actually bring the knife that was the murder weapon, though, a knife that he had purchased while on a skiing trip in Bulgaria. Eddie and Scarlett knew one another from their mutual time at Culcheth High School, and had known one another since they were 11 years old. Scarlett's obsession with death and murder had seemed to consume her, leading to the death of Brianna, and the actual day that Brianna was murdered was not the first time that Scarlett had tried to kill the girl. A few weeks prior, Scarlett had given Brianna numerous ibuprofen tablets after telling Brianna that they were in fact illegal drugs and that she would get high. Esther said that around that time, Brianna had come home from school very sick, and that Esther believed that Brianna was in fact dealing with appendicitis. She said that Brianna was very sick and vomiting, and that there were red blobs in her vomit. Brianna had explained to her mom that the blobs were simply red grape skins, however. Around that time is also when Scarlett and Eddie started to talk about committing murder. The first attempt that the two had made was on one of the boys that they did not like and that was on their hit list. The two had created a fake social media profile and attempted to lure the young man out using that social media page, but the young man had not taken the bait. That is when the two decided to pivot, and they decided that Brianna would be much easier to kill because she was vulnerable. She trusted Scarlett, and she would likely be much easier to lure because of that. Nearing the end of January, Scarlett and Eddie had a plan on how they would lure and how they would murder Brianna. Scarlett even had a handwritten, extensive note that was written out of what the plan was. The note detailed where, when, and how they would lure Brianna and how they would stab her to death. On January 28th, Eddie and Scarlett would attempt to put the plan into action, and they would seem to be successful at first, having convinced Brianna to meet with them, but at the last minute, plans changed on Brianna's end, and she was not able to meet with the pair. On February 11th of 2023, though, sadly, the plans did not fall through. The night before, Eddie had messaged Scarlett to make sure that she had confirmed that Scarlett was coming to meet with them that time, because he didn't want to have another cancellation of their plans like had happened on January 28th. Eddie was also incredibly awful in his wording and messages to Scarlett in regards to Brianna. Eddie, you see, did not know Brianna at all, other than what Scarlett had told him about her and a picture that she had shown him, and he often referred to Brianna as quote-unquote it, rather than she or her, and he also referred to her as a quote femboy thing as well. In court, after the fact, Eddie would state that he was not transphobic, and that transphobia was not a motivation that he had, but rather that he was just using terms that he had heard others, including Scarlett, use in the past, even though there is no evidence of that type of hatred from Scarlett. In fact, much to the contrary. On February 11th, Scarlett told Brianna to meet with her and Eddie at the Culcheth Library, and she even gave her directions on when to leave the house and which bus to take, up to and including telling Brianna to walk to a different bus stop than she would normally use that was further away from her house. Brianna would listen to the directions in full, and she left her house at 12:25 p.m. While Brianna was on the bus, she had texted her mom to tell her that she was on the bus, all by herself, and that she was scared and riddled with anxiety. Sadly, Esther remembers telling Brianna that she was proud of her, because she was. She was very happy that Brianna was out on her own and doing something out of her comfort zone. She also knew Scarlett, and she believed that Scarlett was a good friend to her daughter, which really would make everything so much worse in the end. Brianna would get off the bus and meet with Scarlett and Eddie at 1:53 p.m., and the three of them would last be seen walking along an alleyway on closed-circuit television at 2:02 p.m. As the three of them were in the park, they would converse through Snapchat, seemingly not together the entire time. Scarlett had lured Brianna to the park in the first place by hinting at the fact that they would get drugs and get high together. Scarlett had intimated that she had a drug dealer who would meet them at the park and provide what they needed. At around 2:15 p.m., Brianna sent a message to Scarlett that said, quote, "Girl, I'ma wait where I am until we have drugs, lol. I'm too anxious," unquote. Brianna was clearly feeling the anxiety of being in an unfamiliar place with Eddie, an unfamiliar person, and doing something and waiting to get drugs that was also seemingly unfamiliar to her. At the same time, it was believed that Scarlett was messaging with her drug dealer, but the reality was that there was no drug dealer. Scarlett was having a fake conversation with a Snapchat account that she had created to make it appear that she was trying. Brianna did start to become suspicious, although she didn't really know the extent of what was going on, and she did send a message to another one of her friends at 2:30 p.m. that said, quote, "Scarlett is so weird, girl. I think she's pretending to have a dealer," unquote. Heartbreakingly, that would seem to be the last message that Brianna would send. At roughly 3:06 p.m., Brianna's phone would send one more message to Scarlett that said, quote, "Girl, where are you?" unquote. But that was not a message that was sent by Brianna at all. Scarlett had sent that message as she was trying to establish an alibi for the time that Scarlett was ultimately murdered. That would be the first of many, many lies that would come from Scarlett in the time to come. When she was questioned by police, seeing as she was the last person believed to have been with Brianna, Scarlett would say that Brianna had left her to be with a boy from Manchester. A dog walker walking with her husband only a few minutes later would see Scarlett and Eddie making their way to another field in the park, and when they realized that they had been seen leaving the scene of the crime, they picked up their pace and started to run. It would be 3:13 p.m. when the dog walker would call 999, the emergency number in England, and they asked for police and an ambulance. The dog walker said that someone had been attacked and that she had seen two people running away. The couple had discovered Brianna face down and bleeding heavily. CCTV footage would show Scarlett and Eddie running away only minutes later, corroborating that story, and both would return to their respective homes. Meanwhile, Brianna was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. Scarlett and Eddie would ultimately be arrested the next day on February 12th of 2023 at the same time. They would be charged with murder on February 15th, just 4 days after the attack. The cause of death for young Brianna Ghey was ultimately determined to have been caused by multiple stab wounds. Brianna had been stabbed at least 28 times with deep wounds to her head, chest, neck, and back. Some of the stab wounds were so deep that they had caused bone damage as well, showing the considerable force that was used in the attack and the murder. Brianna also had extensive defensive wounds to her arms that showed that she had tried in vain to fight back against the attack. That proves that not only was Brianna aware of the attack, but she was also aware of the fact that it was one of her few supposed friends that was attacking and killing her. That fact is probably the worst of all. Brianna had a lot of anxiety, and there were a lot of things in the world that she was afraid of. She had lived a life that was filled with bullying and filled with attacks on her, physical, emotional, and mental. And she had lived a life that was one that was very based in that fear. And yet, on February 11th, 2023, when she left her home, she knew that she was leaving for one of the things in the world that she was not afraid of: her friend, Scarlett Jenkinson. In choosing to target Brianna, Scarlett knew that. Scarlett knew that Brianna trusted her. She trusted her enough to take the bus alone. She trusted her enough to meet up with Scarlett and someone that she didn't even know. She trusted Scarlett enough that she didn't even question the fact that she had felt ill the last time that Scarlett had provided her drugs. Scarlett knew that Brianna trusted her fully, and that is what made her an easy target for these two killers. It really does a number on you when you realize that that is what was going through Brianna's mind before her life was taken. Leading up to the trial, there were seemingly a lot of lies that came out, and those would still be coming up at trial in front of a jury. The trial started on November 27th of 2023, and at the time, both Scarlett and Eddie's names were omitted from the media due to the fact that they had been only 15 years old when they committed the crime. Scarlett was known only as Girl X, and Eddie was known only as Boy Y. The case would be held before Mrs. Justice Amanda Yip. While in custody, Scarlett was found to have believed traits of autism and ADHD, and Eddie was diagnosed after his arrest as being autistic. It was also found that after the crime and the stress surrounding the entire situation, Eddie had further developed what is known as selective mutism. Over time, he lost the ability to speak with anyone at all verbally, except for his mother. While at trial, Eddie had used typing to communicate and to answer questions. The prosecution would present their case from November 27th of 2023 to December 8th, and they would present, as previously mentioned, that Scarlett had attempted to kill Brianna previously using ibuprofen, and that she had believed that the murder would appear to be a suicidal overdose. When that did not work, that is when Scarlett's fantasies changed and became far more gruesome. It was presented and shown through text messages that Scarlett had wanted to watch the life leave Brianna's eyes, and she wanted to see the look on Brianna's face when she knew that she was being murdered. Scarlett had also planned to take a part of Brianna's body as a trophy. The prosecution also presented the ways that Eddie had referred to Brianna as previously noted, and that he had even said that he wanted to know if, quote, it will scream like a man or a girl, unquote. The defensive case was different for both Scarlett and Eddie. Each defendant placed all of the blame for the actual murder on the other defendant. Both cases tried to present their defendant only as accessories to murder. Eddie's defense team presented that Scarlett had told Eddie to bring his knife to the park and that she had a plan to stab Brianna. They presented also that Eddie did not take the plan seriously because Scarlett had previously brought up murder on many different occasions and that she had never followed through on any of her plans. In the end, they presented that Scarlett had stabbed Brianna to death. Eddie's defense team said that he was actually another victim of Scarlett, having been manipulated by her because of his autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Conversely, Scarlett's defense team said that while she had lured Brianna to the park, it was only a fantasy that she was fulfilling to see if she could actually lure someone to the park. Her defense team said that she had only watched on as Eddie had committed the murder alone, while she watched on in shock. They said that Scarlett had not stopped Eddie's attack because she was afraid for her own life, saying that she believed that Eddie was a sociopath and would turn the knife on her as well. Seemingly, as I said, a lot of lies. We may never fully know where the truth really is with this case. What we do know is this: Eddie's clothing was covered in an excess of Brianna's blood, and that was where the defense of Scarlett seemed to center. The trial wrapped up on December 20th of 2023, and the end result, after nearly 5 hours of jury deliberations, was that both Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe were found to be guilty in the murder of Brianna Ghey. Justice Yip would announce that there would be life sentences in this case, and the following day it was announced that the identity protection would be coming to an end, and that the identities of both killers would be announced at the sentencing hearing. On February 2nd of 2024, that sentencing hearing would take place. Justice Yip would announce that she needed to set a minimum sentence for both murderers, and that both would only be released in the future if it was deemed that they did not present a danger to society. She laid out that the murder of Brianna had been a joint plan, and that there was extensive discussion between the two. And she pointed out that both had lied to the jury about what had happened leading up to the murder and during the actual act of that murder. Justice Yip laid out that Scarlett seems to blur the lines between fantasy and reality, and she said that Scarlett seemed to lie with ease and make up stories with ease. Between the guilty verdict and the sentencing hearing, Scarlett had again changed her story and told a doctor that Eddie had thrown Brianna down to the ground first and that he had stabbed her 3 or 4 times, and then she said that Eddie had panicked and said that he could not murder Brianna. Scarlett then said that she had taken the knife from Eddie and killed Brianna herself. This was the 3rd or 4th different version of events that Scarlett had presented in the year since her arrest. Justice Yip also said that this murder was extreme, and that far more force than was needed was used in the murder of Brianna, and that if Scarlett and Eddie were not so young, the minimum sentences would be far longer. She also said that she did not believe that Eddie was under the spell of Scarlett, and that she believed that both murderers were equally to blame and equally able to tell right from wrong. She said that this was a very sadistic murder, and ultimately Scarlett would be given a minimum sentence of 22 years in prison, while Eddie received a minimum sentence of 20 years in prison. Ultimately, this crime is seen by most as a hate crime. There are different angles to look at, but the fact that Brianna was a transgender female certainly played a part in the anger and the brutality of her murder, so in my mind there is no denying that fact. A hate crime is one involving violence that is motivated by prejudice on the basis of ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or similar grounds, and it is clear that even though there was an attempt to cover it up, that was a driving force, at least for Eddie, within this case. A vulnerable person was chosen as a victim because of her vulnerability, and that is what is scary. As I said off the top, our children are growing up in a world that is filled with hate. They hear it from their friends, they hear it from others, and they hear it within their homes as well. The human mind inside of all of us is very vulnerable to hearing other people, especially when we are young, and developing our own thoughts and patterns based upon what we hear. We need to be careful. I'm just as guilty as anyone else of certain slants and certain things that come out of my mouth. We need to protect our children so that hopefully we can prevent them from growing up with worse and more radicalized hatred than even we have. I am aware that topics in this episode are certainly going to incite some people. Sadly, we live in a world now where we believe that we should dictate how other people live their lives. We believe that somehow we have been given the commandment to judge others based on every single part of who they are and what makes them them. Somehow we have come to the conclusion that people should never be different than who we are, and to be honest, both sides of every equation are guilty of this. Full stop. We need to remember that at the heart of it all, we need to love one another. For me, it comes back to the Bible, as everything does. John 13:34 shows us that Jesus called us and commanded us to do one thing. You may be shocked to find out that that command was not to hate, or to judge, or to look down on anyone, but rather it is this. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. I feel like that's pretty clear. It doesn't tell us to only love people that live and love and look and believe like we do. It says that we are to love one another, and it doesn't qualify who we should or should not love. We need to love everyone. The division in this world around us over people being different is sickening. We are not and should not feel called to put people down for being different. We are not called to judge, and we are certainly not called to hate. I want to end this episode, as I always try, with something positive and with something hopeful. Esther Gray, Brianna's mom, has started putting into action a program called Peace in Hope. The program is a legacy to her daughter, with the goal being to bring mindfulness to students across England. She says that the death of her daughter was obviously traumatic for her and for students and for people that knew Brianna and heard her story. Her goal is to teach students how to process and deal with negative emotions in a healthy way to try and prevent mental health problems from developing later in life out of traumatic events. There is a GoFundMe page at gofundme.com/f/Brianna Ghey Memorial, and so far it has raised over £87,000. The goal is to raise money to send teachers on mindfulness in schools projects training courses that will provide more support for children of all ages. As a part of her own healing journey, Esther recently met with Scarlett's mom and said that she did so because she knows that both of them are mothers who are going through situations that no mom should ever have to go through. Esther hopes that the two can one day work together on the peace in mind ideals. Esther said that Scarlett's mom was very respectful and open with her when they met. Peace in mind is the cry of Esther's heart because she knew that in the aftermath of Brianna's murder, she could either stay and dwell in that tragedy, or she could continue to grow and try to change the world. Thankfully, she has chosen the latter. In closing, I want to thank you again for listening to Gone But Never Forgotten, and thank you for working hard as well to make the world around you a better place, rather than becoming a part of the forever ongoing problems. Until next week, take care, be well, and be better.